Can you hear me?
Yes.
This
Hello.
is Sister Kay, and we have Mass at 11:30, so I'll be leaving after a half hour. So I'm sorry to miss out, but
Glad you're here. We'll be recording. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for making the time and the space to join us today. We are very glad to have you here to talk about the biodiversity crisis that is in front of us. We will take a moment in a few minutes to do some introductions, but as we like to do all things, and particularly those things that are particularly hard, we want to root ourselves in prayer. And to start, we invite you to take a few deep breaths. The content we're talking about today is not easy content necessarily. We talk about how it is a crisis, and that is what we are facing. But neither is the work we are called to do as followers of Christ, right? It was never promised to be easy, but to be good. Throughout the Gospels, we have story after story of Christ pointing the attention of his disciples, of the crowds, of the people he was talking to, toward suffering in the stories he told and the people he accompanied. We are called to pay attention to where the world is hurting and to be present there, to weep, to feel compassion, and to be moved toward generative action. So thank you for showing up to the real of what's happening today so that we can be moved to concrete and impactful action. So we invite you to take a few deep breaths to center yourself as we move into it. We begin in prayer. Creator God, all life forms that exist on our sister Mother Earth come from your hands. You created us in the diversity of species, giving each of your creatures a unique and singular mark. We praise you with all your creatures. We praise you for biodiversity. We contemplate your action that transforms and recreates everything in the diversity of species that throughout natural history have been appearing or being naturally extinct as a natural result of evolution. Each species contributes in its own way to offer humanity, free of charge, the ecosystem services that beautify, dignify, and fill human life with colors and meaning. However, today we see the threat to the diversity of life in our common home, and that human action throughout history has drastically accelerated the rate of extinction of species, increasing up to 1,000 times the natural rates. Inspired by Pope Francis, we want to reaffirm we have no such right. We want to turn the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor into our cry. Teach us, O God, to care for creation. Inspire us to commit ourselves and engage in concrete actions to protect and conserve every species on our planet. Through Christ, your Son, and our brother, we pray. Amen. I'm so honored and excited to share this space with some phenomenal voices on biodiversity, and we'll give some bios more with each introduction. But first, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Anna Johnson. I'm the Senior Programs Manager for North America for the Laudato Si Movement, and I'm based in Seattle, Washington. And here with us also, we have Caroline Wambui-Kiru, who's the Biodiversity and Climate Change Manager for Laudato Si Movement. We have Wesley Cocozello, the Communications and Programs Manager for the Justice, Peace, and Ecology for the Missionary Society of St. Columban in the United States. And we have Kat Henke, Spatial Ecologist and Associate Director of the St. Kateri Conservation Center. So we've got some phenomenal speakers today to talk about what we're going to dive into, what we're going to be talking about. But we thought we would start with a quick overview of what is biodiversity. I know that some of you on this call are experts, but perhaps many of you are like I was. I think it's a beautiful word, you know. Before this, I am concerned about the crisis, when I hear about the biodiversity crisis, then I love plants and I love animals and I do my part to save the bees. And my heart breaks when I hear of another species going extinct. But I'm not sure that I could speak with any more authority than that on what biodiversity is. If this is you, don't worry. This is one of the things we'll talk about in this webinar. But first, let's talk about why we collectively, the people gathered here today, have decided to launch ourselves into addressing the biodiversity crisis in the US through the lens of the Catholic Church. And a crisis indeed it is. Perhaps some of you have seen the Stockholm Planetary Boundaries graphic. If you feel overwhelmed by this graphic, don't worry. You don't need to be an expert in the science to be acting for a common home on this, but we thought we would just share this to give you a brief insight of it. Scientists came together in an effort to show and raise awareness of the interconnectedness of the ecological crisis we are facing, so that we can help people see that it is an interconnected crisis rather than standalone issues. In 2009, they identified 9 processes and systems which, quote, regulate the stability and resilience of the Earth system, the interactions of land, ocean, atmosphere, and life that together provide conditions upon which our society depend. They then made an update to this graphic in 2015. As they extrapolated these 9 global priorities relating to the human-induced changes to the environment, they also attempted to quantify how we are doing in regards to operating within each, quote, safe operating space for humanity within each area. As you can see, there are some areas where we're not quite sure how to measure. These are the gray ones out. There's no global quantifications. There are a couple areas where we're in the safe operating zone, including one of which is the ozone layer, which is one that we collectively came together to address a outsized impact in that area. And now we're back in this safe operating zone, which is wonderful and hopeful as we look at some of these other areas. There are areas that we have crossed over into the limits of what is safe to use. 2 of these, quote, climate change and biosphere integrity, are what scientists call core boundaries. Significantly altering either of these core boundaries would drive the Earth system into a new state. In this biosphere integrity space, we have moved beyond the zone of uncertainty into one in which we are at high risk. Ecosystems are under unprecedented pressure. Species have gone extinct in the past, of course, but at a rate natural to biological processes. Pope Francis says, though, now, the great majority become extinct for reasons related to human activity. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. We have no such right. I still remember the first time that I read Laudato Si. This paragraph made me gasp and put my copy down, and I had to walk away from it for a minute because it was just so incredibly impactful upon my heart. Yet we rarely hear about this crisis, except perhaps in a news alert here or there when a beloved and well-known species is close to extinction. Yet there are species we have never heard of going extinct at unprecedented rates. So I just want to invite us to pause again and take another deep breath. This data might be hard to consume, but it is important for us to be looking here as Christ points us towards. And we wanted to mention that our challenges and solutions are rooted in the very place in which we find ourselves. This means both in terms of being in the United States, but also in terms of your biome or your bioregion. So we invite you to take a look at this map from the EPA and into the chat, go ahead and put which biome you are calling in from, which bioregion are you in? So as you may know already, but it might help to look at this map and see the colors. So this purple color, the tropical wet forest, this color, the temperate deciduous forest, plains, the desert, the temperate rainforest or the temperate forest, the northern forest. We would love to see this. And so we want to talk today about how all of these are interconnected, and to talk about when we talked about launching this webinar and conversations around biodiversity, we received some feedback around, we're focused on climate change, and that is important, and that is so important for us to be focused on. And what we also know is by looking into this, that it helps, it's a wraparound support. They are integrated. Scientists agree that the more biodiverse ecosystems are, the more resilient it is in responding to the effects of climate change. These are interconnected. And so with that brief introduction and our gratitude for you joining us today, I am excited to pass it on to my esteemed colleague, Caroline Wambui-Kiru. Caroline is the Biodiversity and Climate Manager at Laudato Si Movement. Her role brings ease of workflow support to climate justice and biodiversity campaigns and strategies, ensuring maximum impact. She has been a global changemaker for over 15 years, having championed vulnerable groups' inclusion into the climate justice arena in Africa and globally. She joins us today from Kenya. Carol has a communication for development degree and in project management, and co-founded Mind Me International that speaks to empowerment, education, and climate justice. If she's not changing the world through advocacy and activacy, strumbled over that one, you will find her passionately singing, which I can attest to, as she absolutely did as we marched through the freezing temperatures in Montreal last December during the COP around biodiversity. So Caroline, I pass it over to you.
Wow, Anna, thank you so much for that very wonderful introduction, and even the introduction to around biodiversity and what it is. And good morning, I think, for most of you. It's around 7:15 p.m. We're just about to eat our dinner in a couple of minutes, and I hope that we are all doing okay. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for having me to build more capacity and engage on how we can be able to protect biodiversity in the global north. So let's get into the gist of it. If we could go back to the previous slide, what on earth is biodiversity? And for me, I've grown up in Kenya, and I've been blessed enough to be able to go about in various countries within this wonderful continent, and I've always been surrounded by nature. My background is a forest, and it's something that really makes me feel at ease, at peace, and makes me, look at life from a point of, we can do better. We can continue protecting these places that give us that essence of peace and all of that. So like everyone, I have lived with biodiversity in my life. And biodiversity is the natural world that surrounds us. It's the variety and diversity of life on Earth. So in simpler words, I think if I could give maybe 5-6 words just to describe biodiversity, it is the variety of life on Earth. And if we go further and engage with the United Nations Convention of Biodiversity, it states it's the variability among living organisms. So this includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So it's all the plants and animals that interact with each other and the physical world around them in areas called ecosystems. And if we could move on to the next slide, we have 3 types of biodiversity. And this speaks to the variety of life on Earth. And we have the first one is the genetic level, we have the species level, and we have the ecosystem diversity level. And on the genetic level, biodiversity is what makes you different from everyone you know. Each individual has a unique mixture of genes. And that's why we say each and every one of us is unique. We are all created by one God, but we are unique in everything, in things that we do. There are things that you can say, this is Caroline, this is Anna. And even genetically, we have different genes. And then on the specific species level, it's all the different plants and animals that exist, from the Western lowland gorilla to the humpback whale or a portobello mushroom. So that's the species level. And then at the ecosystem level, these are areas of biodiversity where plants and animals interact with the environment and in different ways. Take, for example, a coral reef system. There you may find a variety of corals, fish, rays, turtles, jellyfish, urchins, seaweed, phytoplankton, and algae, all interacting within the same ecosystem. And so these different types of diversity fit together, and they are interwoven, with each kind coexisting and depending on the other. And ecosystems come in different forms, which occur in different areas. For example, let me give an example of Seychelles has coral reefs. Kenya is rich in grasslands. Mexico has deserts. Finland has woodlands. So they vary, they're different and occur in different areas. And each ecosystem has certain species of plants, animals, and insects, its own unique biodiversity. And so if we could move on to the next slide, we talk about what is the importance of biodiversity. And if you look at that slide, it has genetic diversity, protect freshwater resources, provision of food security. There are very many things that promote the importance of biodiversity and why we should be protecting it. But I'll just highlight a couple because we know the variety of life on Earth is often mind-boggling. However, is biodiversity important for our Earth? Yes. If yes, then why is it important for us to know about it, to engage with it, and talk about it? And so we humans are the bane of Mother Earth. And you must have heard of animals like the bottlenose dolphin, the Bengal tiger, and the Tasmanian tiger, among some of the recent species that have already gone extinct. However, what you don't know is that the rate of animal extinction is more than 500 to 1,000 times % higher than the average level. And in these last 2 decades, we have wiped out more than 20% of the Great Amazon rainforest, which took millions of invisible species to extinction. But I'm not here to just, highlight the doom. I know we're in the middle of this severe biodiversity climate crisis, but what biodiversity is able to give us is we can be able to do very basic actions, very basic interactions and conversations that can help shape and bring back the world that we want to live in. So what is the importance of biodiversity? It's actually, biodiversity provides the food we eat. You've already have some of the idea about importance of biodiversity in agriculture. And we know that if 90% of our entire global population depends on just 15 species of livestock for food, and this includes the likes of cows, goats, pigs, chickens, and others. And similarly, while more than 100 of food crops sustain human life, 75% of all humans rely on only 12 crops as a staple food source. That kind of gives us the reality of how little we take from Mother Earth, but the impact we give back on the biodiversity crisis that we experience today. The other bit is that biodiversity keeps us healthy. We had COVID-19 and the world almost came to a standstill. And we humans have long safeguarded ourselves from diseases by eating effective combinations of diverse plants, animals, and fungi. And believe it or not, research has shown that there is a low occurrence of diseases like malaria and respiratory infection in areas with natural vegetation. And so this means that with diminishing biodiversity, humans should be concerned about whether they'll find the drugs and vaccines needed for upcoming diseases. And I think just the third bit to talk about importance of biodiversity is that for those asking that question, why we need the ecosystems, it's because it makes us human beings and the ecosystems work together. There are many benefits we get from a biodiverse environment that we take for granted. And for example, take the air we breathe in. It wouldn't be clean and pure if there weren't any oxygen produced by plants. In turn, these species take in pollutants that are harmful to us. And so, most importantly, biodiversity brings us raw materials like oil, biofuels to sustain the technology we've grown accustomed to for several decades. And so those are just the 3 things I wanted to highlight about the importance of biodiversity and why we should be thinking about how to protect our common home. At this point, I wish to hand it back to Anna And I hope that we'll have the next questions that will come during the breakout sessions. We'll be able to get into the further nitty-gritties of engagement. Thank you, Anna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was a fantastic overview of biodiversity. Really appreciate that. So now we figured this is a, it's a bit of an overwhelming topic, perhaps. But again, to say we are rooted in our local places and spaces. And so hopefully you had a chance to look at that map earlier, or you know already what biome you live in. And so we invite you just to go into breakout rooms right now and discuss. Pick one or two of these questions. Don't try and cover all four of them, but whichever one might particularly attract or appeal to you. So we'll go into breakout rooms and have about 8 minutes in these breakout rooms to discuss what is biodiversity for you locally, pinpointed into your home and your local bioregion, what plants are around you, what animals are around you, how are you rooted in this? And then we'll come back and continue to talk about this and bring it into the light of our faith and think about what we can do as action coming out of it. So we hope you have a wonderful conversation, and we'll see you back here in a few minutes. Seconds. Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited to have you back in this room. I hope that you had a great conversation. If you have any insight that came to you while you were chatting, while you were in the site, would love to just hear that in the chat. If you want to drop a few words, a few things that you might have learned from someone else, or something you learned as you reflected on these questions, a question that was piqued for you, perhaps. Something about your place and space and your reflection with each other. If you can put that in the chat, that would be wonderful to get a little tidbit of what you were all talking about. And as those are, road runners are cool. I love that. That's pretty great. We were talking about bees in this, in the larger group breakout room, talking about the power of bees and how much even little kids love watching them. The importance of noticing and stopping to take time to care about skunk cabbage. I love that.
Oh no.
Pollinator gardens, bees, so much good. Connection of water, butterflies. These are beautiful. Okay, so as these continue to come in, I am really excited to bring into, I'm going to add Wesley in Spotlight here, and to pass it over to my esteemed colleague, Wesley, who works at the Columbans. So Wesley Cocozello is the Communications and Programs Manager for Justice, Peace, and Ecology for the Missionary Society of St. Columban in the United States. The Columbans are an international community of Catholic priests and lay people who live in solidarity with those who are poor and who are made poor and marginalized, including the wounded earth, in 17 countries around the world. Among his duties with the Columbans, Wesley is the host and executive producer of Jubilee for the Earth, Biodiversity and Our Sacred Story, a wonderful podcast that I highly recommend, and is a member of the Columban Working Group on Biodiversity. He also serves as the communications lead for the Faiths for Biodiversity and is a board member of the United States Catholic Mission Association. Everyone who knows Wesley knows that if you want something done well with a wonderful dose of perspective and wit along the way, you ask him. And he's a phenomenal partner in this work. So thank you so much, Wesley, for bringing the light of our faith to this conversation.
Thank you, Anna. So good to be with you all this morning. And thanks to Anna and Laudato Si Movement for inviting us, inviting me and the Columbans to be a part of this gathering. So I'm going to share about 6 minutes or so of kind of like how our faith interacts and kind of sheds light on the biodiversity crisis. And I hope, usually I do this in 90 minutes. So we're going to see what we can accomplish in about 6. so I want to suggest that we can kind of understand God's creation in light of the kind of movements, if you will, of Jesus of Nazareth's life as well. And so we're going to walk through the gospel of creation, the crucifixion of creation, and the restoration of creation. And so I wanted to start a shameless plug for the patron of the society I work for, Saint Columban, who was the 6th century Irish missionary, who said that understand the creation if you wish to know the creator. And I particularly love this very somewhat petty sentence: if you will not know the former, be silent concerning the creator. And I love that quote for a lot of reasons, because one, it kind of offers, I think, a needed correction about how we understand Catholic tradition in light of our common home. I think we sometimes assume that St. Francis and Pope Francis are sort of the only folks that have talked about nature and God's creation in our tradition. But in fact, it has been sort of a cornerstone of both scripture and the lives of the saints for many thousands of years. And it's something we need to recover rather than something that we need to kind of do for the first time. And I'm sure that's no news to anyone on this call. The other thing about this quote that I really love is it kind of encapsulates a truth that we hold, that God is present in all things. Not a new concept, I think, for us as Catholics who believe in the sort of the smells and bells and the sacramental nature of all things. But we know that creation is the first book of God's revelation. And so not only do all creatures possess some divine spark within them, but they also offer a window into the nature of God. And some of the things that I just want to share that we know about God from creation, we know one thing about God, that God is very attentive to all creatures, because just look at the complexity and the uniqueness of all things. Clearly, God has put so much love into everything that they have created. And I think the other thing that we know about God from just looking at creation is that God certainly delights in diversity, because there is so much of it. And if we could just move on to the next slide. And kind of talking about that diversity, I think we can kind of see how another aspect of God, we know that God is a communion of 3 persons, and I think that is reflected in the creation that they made, right? Like, we are all interconnected, not only as human beings, but with the non-human world around us. We mirror God's nature in that way. And so I want to move into kind of the crucifixion of creation. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis reminds us a pretty essential biblical truth, that sin is the rupture of relationship between God, our neighbor, and the earth itself. If we imagine sort of like the Garden of Eden, where all things kind of coexisted in harmony, in relationship with each other, the opposite of that, sin, is the rupture of those relationships. And I really love that definition, because it brings a real concreteness to like what sin is. From my perspective, as sort of like a millennial Catholic, I always found sin to be this very amorphous sort of I should be guilty about everything kind of thing. But this kind of gives a kind of a concreteness to it. Like, we believe that we are made for relationship, and that is sort of the foundation of how we move through the world. The other thing I want to suggest as well is, like, as people walking in the footsteps of Christ, and Anna pointed this out really well, like, we are called to kind of stand at the foot of the cross, and kind of be in solidarity with those that we are crucifying. And I think so often we think about that in relationship to other humans, rightly so, but I would like to suggest that creation is also being nailed to the cross, and we have kind of a moral obligation to be in solidarity there as well. Because like our own lives, our own sort of moral imperative, our own nature is bound up in relationship with that as well. And if we can move to the last slide, or the last content slide. But we know that after the cross is the resurrection. And I remember when I first read this passage in Romans 8 after reading Laudato Si, it sort of, took my breath away, the way that Anna sort of had her breath taken away by Laudato Si, because I read it in a different way. And so I'm actually just going to read this whole thing, if you'll humor me. So from Romans 8, for creation awaits with eager expectation the revelation of the children of God. For creation was made subject to futility, not of its own accord, but because of the one who subjected it, in the hope that creation itself would be set free from slavery to corruption and share in the glorious freedom of the children of God. And the reason I think this was so profound for me is that I realized after reading it after Laudato Si for the first time that St. Paul here is talking about all creation. I think so often we think about the resurrection as redeeming, as liberating only people. But in fact, God's vision is so much more inclusive than we give them credit for. And all of nature is bound up in the resurrection. All of Jesus's act of salvation liberates all things. And I think together as humans, but also as non-humans, we are all kind of on the journey together towards the kingdom where all things will have life and will flourish. So that is sort of my quick spiel. If we can move to the actual last slide. There's no way that I have done justice to anything that I've said. So I hope this is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these themes and theological reflections, but I did want to point to some resources for further study. Obviously, there's Laudato Si, but you guys all know about that. I want to highlight two books that I have been really formative for me. One is The Death of Life, The Horrors of Extinction by Father Sean McDonough, a Columban priest from Ireland, who, what I like about this book is he traces the history of creation spirituality from the beginning of our tradition till sort of the modern period. And so it's sort of this very nice, comprehensive look from a historical lens. And then the second book is Ask the Beast, Darwin and the God of Evolution by Sister Dr. Elizabeth Johnson, which is a phenomenal text that really puts science and faith into dialogue in a really generative way. And then I'll also make a pitch for reading the Book of Nature, God's first book of Revelation, which I will say you probably need a scientist to help you translate. But I know in the DC area where I am based, there are a lot of scientists who are very generous with their time doing like these nature walks that kind of take you through and show you the plants and the animals and how they all interconnect. And so I'm hopeful that there's probably something like that where you are, and I would recommend doing them if you can. So I will pass it back over to Anna.
My goodness, thank you so much, Wesley. So for those of you who are theology nerds like myself, perhaps you've recognized we are doing the pastoral process around biodiversity. We're taking time to see what's the reality of the ground in terms of the science and our local reality. Wesley did a phenomenal job of bringing us through this judge or discern piece of this. And what does this move us towards is that idea of action. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to Kat. I'm going to spotlight here just now. And Kat Hankey is another phenomenal collaborator. She is a spatial geologist and GIS specialist with a Master's of Environmental Management in Ecosystem Science and Conservation from Duke University. Kat directs the Kateri Center's GIS and ESRI story map programs, and is active in all aspects of advancing its mission, including public outreach, planning, land protection, stewardship, grant writing, education, and social media. Kat worked for the Nature Conservancy prior to her current work as GIS coordinator for a nonprofit organization focused on protecting and restoring aquatic ecosystems. And so her work with the Kateri Center is volunteer done, and she just brings her whole heart, soul, spirituality, and sense of faith into this on the ground, getting her hands dirty and engaged. And I just have to say, Kat, you are a phenomenally fun and creative person to work with as we brainstorm what some of our solutions might be. So with that, I pass it over to Kat.
Thanks so much, Anna, and such a nice introduction. Okay, so today I'm just going to be sharing a little bit with you about how we can actually increase biodiversity at home and in our neck of the woods, in our backyards, and together with our communities. Next slide. So just a little brief bit about the Kateri Center. So the Kateri Conservation Center is a national nonprofit, and we are working together as professional ecologists and educators with our day jobs in these fields in order to help other people of faith to work together to look at our own homes and to have education and outreach, as well as habitat restoration, and really help to learn and live Laudato Si as it applies to our daily lives. Next slide. And so we are named after Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, who is the first Native American saint to be canonized. And she really is the patroness of those who work in ecology, as we know that our Indigenous people really do have the traditional ecological knowledge to help us, and really need to be at the forefront and be in the forefront of this effort and really leading this charge. So she is our patron saint of our center. Next slide. And so, as Anna mentioned, we are all volunteers. And by day, I am a GIS coordinator of a nonprofit, and I map all of the stream barriers in the country for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we work to remove dams and fix road culverts. But I am the associate director of the center, volunteer. But our board is a women-led board with Indigenous representatives. And again, we're all professional ecologists, so we can really help people who might not have that expertise to understand how we can do these things at home. And so, as was mentioned earlier, biodiverse ecosystems really are more resilient and better adaptable to change. So it's important that we build that biodiversity in the spaces that we steward. And we also need these ecosystems to be healthy for the ecosystem services and natural resources that they provide to us. And so really, as we all heard, and as we know, it's our duty to create these healthy ecosystems around us. So what can we do? We already heard from Leslie, next slide, that it really is something that's important for us to have an ecological conversion and see what's around us, read the book of nature. And that really is the best way to start. So learn to love nature so that you want to protect it. And there's some really tangible ways that we can do that. And so this is a nice quote from St. Augustine, but really looking at created things and how beautiful they are, and learn what's around you. And each species really has specific roles in the ecosystem. And as we build up these different relationships with the creatures on our properties and at our churches and our schools, you can start to see these relationships of these creatures between each other and with us and with God. So these relationships are really at the core of ecology and Catholic ecology. And if you can learn that and notice it, then you'll naturally want to do more to protect it. And so on your school grounds and on your church grounds and in your homes, you'll be able to really see the different needs of the different species around you. Some species, especially insects, really do need specific host plants in order to survive. And our native insects cannot eat non-native plants. And so what you plant around you really makes a huge difference in biodiversity. Next slide. And so one of the ways that you can not only identify what's around you, but also work to help scientists to understand what's around them and around our properties and how we can protect that and what steps need to be taken, is you can use iNaturalist if you have a smartphone. Next slide. iNaturalist is an online social network of people sharing biodiversity information. But it's very, very easy to use. It's a free application that you can get on your smartphone, and you download it, and then you can take a picture of what you see in on your property or on your church property, and it will automatically tell you what it is that you're looking at. It is really, really, really interesting, and it uses artificial intelligence to identify via photo what these are, but it also contributes to a large database of species information. And so we're cataloging biodiversity on Catholic stewarded properties this way. Next slide. This is just an example. We have a project that you can join. Once you join iNaturalist, you can join our project, and we can help record all of the species that all of you find, but you can also just not join our project, but collect this information and still contribute to this large data set. And we can also filter that information out based on the boundaries of, say, parish properties and schools and other religious orders and beyond. So this is what it looks like. It shows up on the map, and then all of this information can be used to direct where we restore habitat. So using iNaturalist is one really amazing way of identifying what's around you so that you do feel that desire to want to protect it. And once you have that, there's a couple other things that you can begin to do to make a huge difference. And the number one cause of biodiversity loss is habitat loss. We are managing our property in a way right now that is oftentimes completely unsustainable for our little brothers and sisters in Christ. And so we can make a huge difference by just changing our properties to be wildscaping, to be more natural. What would have been there before in the biome that you live in that your neck of the woods. And so you can see, some lawn is okay for sports and for other, gathering, but really we love lawns, especially in the United States, but they're very, very harmful for biodiversity. And so you want the top picture, not necessarily that bottom picture. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So creatures need that habitat. And really one of the main things that you can do is plant native plants. Next. Because what we've found and what research has shown is that as we increase the number and species of native plants on our property, the number of species of other types of organisms increases linearly. So the more plants you plant, the more insects come, and then those insects are in turn food for other organisms, really building upon that food web and creating that foundation and really resilient network of ecosystems and relationships. So how can you start? First of all, identifying what's native to your neck of the woods, your biome. What lived here before it was paved for a parking lot or that your home was built. And it's really also important to choose host species that are important for specific insects and keystone trees, and which in particular oak trees are so important. They host a variety of different types of insects. So planting an oak tree does a lot more for your property than, say, planting a native petunia, for example. So choosing the ones that are going to be a lot more bang for your buck, as they say, and planting those in your home. But you can start small. If you have a small balcony, you can put some native plants and potted plants, some milkweed. It really doesn't have to be a huge area, but just starting small and changing the way that we actually plant what's around us and tend and cultivate this and steward the land around you. Next slide. And one way that you can do this on our website at kateri.org, we have a habitat certification that you can have. We have signs that help you to learn how to do this more specifically for your site. We also have Mary gardens with native plants and other ways that you can learn how to better rewild your landscape. And you can put a sign on your yard to show to other folks, hey, I'm doing this. Maybe it's something that you might want to do too. So we do have that available and lots of resources on our website to help. We have a map that shows all of the habitats. We have about 400 registered at this time, and some of these are very, very huge habitats with religious orders. This is the Queen of Peace Monastery in Canada, and just very, very beautiful, inspiring habitats that you can look at close to where you live and work toward as examples. And so we have that mapper up on our website too that you can look at. We are also working to help parishes. So if you have a parish that you want to look at better gardening and what plants you could plant, we can help with that by providing designs and plants specific to your area. And so those community spaces are really, really important. And that really gets at this next point, which is the third. Once you've kind of started to do this in your own home, and one of the main things that we could do as Catholics is to connect habitat. There are so many Catholic stewarded properties, and both within the church through parishes, schools, religious orders, and beyond, but also private homes, and that if we could connect habitat, species need connected networks of habitat and corridors to migrate. And we have so much land area that's stewarded by Catholic people, that if we were to work together to do these efforts, what if the church and all of the parishes could lead the way in rewilding all parish properties? So when you go to a Catholic church, you know that you're not going to see a manicured lawn. You're going to see, a native habitat, a big pollinator patches, and people just knew, hey, the Catholic churches, this is what we do. What if we could do that together? And how can we build those migratory flyways and things by utilizing these Catholic stewarded properties and bringing all of our fellow Catholics with us? So if you have any questions, you can contact me at kat.sankateri@gmail.com, and we are happy to provide any information that you might want for your specific neck of the woods. That's all I've got.
My goodness. Thank you so much, Kat. As the comments are coming in through the chat, such a hope-filled and hopeful presentation. And it just is so helpful to have a scientist rooted in the science, letting us know what is the scientific realities of what our Earth needs around us. Just so grateful for your presentation and your collaboration on this. So in case it's helpful to have all of these great ideas that Kat presented on one slide, so you can take a picture with your phone or a screenshot if you'd like. We collated them. So what can I do? What can we do in response to this? The first thing that we'll invite you to do is to sign on to the joint partner statement that will be dropped into the chat here just a second. And this will go to the UN around trying to protect biodiversity. So this is sort of your advocacy piece of how to do this. And then we invite you to sort of level up. So start with where Wesley and Kat both recommended of reading the book of creation, and spend time outdoors observing and noticing beautiful creation around us. And to do that through iNaturalist, that app that's just beautiful. I have to say, since getting to know Kat a while ago, I downloaded it on my phone, and it is so fun to now, instead of being there's a bird out my window, to be able to call it by name and know about its migratory patterns and why it's here right now. And it's very cool to know that when we're called to love creation, it means that we're called to know creation too. And then to listen to the Columban podcast. You all heard Wesley's phenomenal journey through the spirituality of this, and it is a great podcast just to continue to pull us towards recognizing and being aware of biodiversity. As you sort of level up then, learning about native plants in your area and planting a Kateri habitat in your space. If you are in an apartment that has an outdoor window that you can put a window box on, awesome. The bees and the butterflies will love that. If you've got a huge yard, awesome, so every level up that you can do and planting those spaces, so great. And then sort of that next level is what Kat said around connecting habitats, approaching your faith institution, your parish, your congregational lands around planting this Kateri habitat and really trying to rewild the lands that we live on. So we will have some time afterwards for Q&A. But we just first of all wanted to recognize that some people may need to leave at the top of the hour, as that's the time we had allotted. And we just want to say a deep, deep gratitude for all of you joining here today. This is a crisis that we all of us who presented today, spend a lot of time worrying about and being concerned about. I'm also going to just drop a bunch of links into the chat right now. But this is a crisis that a lot of us spend a lot of time worrying about and really concerned about. And we want to help engage the U.S. Catholic community to think about how to move forward. As we started this presentation with the quote from Laudato Si, thinking about how Pope Francis calls us to care about biodiversity, he says again, "It is not enough, however, to think of different species merely as potential, quote, resources to be exploited, while overlooking the fact that they have value in themselves. Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species which we will never know, which our children will never see, because they have been lost forever. The great majority become extinct for reasons related to human activity. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. You being here today, you being willing to break open your heart for the pain of creation crying out to you, is you saying no to this culture of saying that species are resources to be exploited. You are saying that I refuse to accept this extinction of thousands of species, and I instead choose to join together with our Catholic community to say yes to creation, to say yes to we are standing up for us. So because of all of us joining here today and taking these actions, there's greater hope for these species. Mammals and birds, yes, and also fungi, algae, worms, insects, microorganisms, and so much more. So as we started, I invite you to end by taking another deep breath. Something we also learned from animals, I know I learned from my dog, anxiety is held in our body until we can shake it out. So we invite you to find some time today to take a walk, to stretch, to dance, to move in some way, so that we can move with the stress through our body and move together forward, walking and dancing through the urgency of this crisis with purposeful motion towards holistic and holy solutions. So again, thank you so much to Caroline, Wesley, and Kat for your wisdom, leadership, and collaboration in this area. And to each of you here, thank you for joining with us. It has been a real honor to be together with all of you today, and moreover, to be together in this work of caring for our common home. So thank you. If you do have some questions, I believe, I know at least Wesley has a few minutes to stay on. I'm not sure about Kat. I'm sorry I didn't ask you. But I'm going to stop sharing now and just again say thank you so much to everyone. And have a wonderful day if you have to leave. If you do have questions, you can put them into the chat or come off mute now.
Thank you.
Kat, I'll ask really, or anybody. So I think the first time that I really understood why people were planting natives, and not just as a preference, was I had spent about an hour watching one of Doug Tallamy's summaries. So I'm just wondering, what would be the polite way to say this? Is there any space between the Kateri Center and Doug Tallamy? Oops, she had to drop off.
Oh, well, Doug Tallamy used to be my professor.
Oh,
So,
okay, great.
yeah, I worked with him a good bit. I was a student in his lab too.
Sure, good.
But so we definitely, everything that we promote is in line with his you know, Bringing Nature Home is a wonderful resource, that book. And I believe it's 75% of your plants should be native plants is what he promotes, and so we very much try to push that through.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've shared, he gives the speech very often, and he's able in an hour to kind of describe the whole thing, and kind of it's upbeat. And so especially with non-Catholic audiences, that's the resource I share first. But thanks for saying that. Thanks for everything you do. I think we've been emailing, but is such powerful resources. I didn't know it was all volunteer time. God bless you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, okay. So my husband and I just had a vacation in Pennsylvania, and there were miles of corn all brought closely together, all for food for animals. I mean, it was just unsettling how, I mean, it was beautiful in a way, but it's not a biodiversity monoculture. So and also all the pain and the agony, terrible deaths that food animals like cows and pigs and chickens. I mean, shouldn't Catholics be trying to approach biodiversity by changing their diets as well, you know, to a few plant-based days a week?
I'm going to pass this question to Wesley. I see you nodding. So
yeah, so a lot of the biodiversity loss that is happening around the world, agriculture is a big driver of that, and particularly cattle. A lot of the recent deforestation in the Amazon is for cattle ranching specifically. And I think, but one thing I do want to, I guess, nuance that is that agriculture itself is not bad. It's this sort of like industrialized mono type of agriculture that has developed in the West, the kind of agriculture that indigenous people practice, which, I mean, Kate would be much better to talk about than me, but like where crops grow together and they kind of mutually reinforce each other, that kind of agriculture, I think, like has been shown to like increase biodiversity. But to the point of reducing meat consumption, I would say, and I have said this in many talks I give on this, the fastest thing you can do to reduce your impact on the planet is to eat less meat. Like there's really no way of getting around that. And particularly cows. I mean, like, you know, we know that like raising chickens, for example, uses way less resources than cattle. So I think really if you kind of if you like, Anna had a great sort of metaphor about like a ladder of engagement, you know, if you start with like really reducing and perhaps then eliminating beef consumption, I think you would go a long way towards reducing that impact. The other thing I'll say from a Catholic perspective is like we used to, and there has been, you know, we used to fast every Friday, right? Like there was not, now we just fast during Lent. And I think there is some wisdom in bringing that stuff back. Yeah, I know I talked about recovery in my section of the presentation. And, you know, fasting is not just some sort of interior spiritual discipline, but it is also a way of standing in solidarity with those that are made poor. You know, I forget which saint it is, said something like, not giving your food to the poor is stealing, some kind of quote like that, you know? So 100% essentially, I would say, like, definitely if you incorporating fasting back into your spiritual practice as sort of a year-round exercise, and then, yeah, reducing first beef consumption and then other kind of meat consumption will go a long way. I don't know if Kat, if you wanted to add to that at all.
I think that was great. I think the other thing too is supporting the local agriculture around you. In particular, there's lots of farmers that are working to do more best management practices that can help to, you know, still provide food, but also doing things on through their agriculture operation that doesn't have as bad of an impact on, say, our rivers and streams and our forest, and very much more integrating both habitat for wildlife and agriculture. So the less industrialized agriculture being the preferred.
Thanks so much, Kat and Wesley. Yeah, great answers. Jim, I see you've got your hands up. Great to see you. Oh, you're on mute though. You'll have to unmute.
Carol.
Jim,
Yeah.
we can't hear you, sorry.
You're talking to me?
No, Jim McIntosh.
Yeah.
There you go.
Going back to Wesley's comments about the destruction of the Amazon rainforest and to provide pasturage for beef cattle. Many years ago, I was working with an indigenous group displaced by the Civil War in the Petén, the rainforest in eastern Guatemala. And at that time, the horizon was filled with smoke from burning forest. Conglomerates headed by military generals were burning down the forest to create land for pasturage for cattle. It takes about 5 acres of grass to create enough beef for one McDonald's hamburger. And the quality, it's deceptive. The rainforest looks so luxuriant, but the soil, once the trees are burned and the pasturage is used for a couple of years, can't sustain further life. And the whole productivity of the land is destroyed. And similarly, in a more contemporary vein, in Maui, much of the destruction in Maui, the forest fires, were created by the fact that beginning in the 19th century, colonial interest filled in wetlands that provided protective barriers in order to create plantations, also introduced invasive species that resulted in a lot of undergrowth that wasn't natural to the area and created the kind of tinderbox that we saw go up in flames just a little more than a week ago.
Thanks so much for sharing, Jim. Yeah, absolutely. Joyce, I see you've got a question, your hand up.
Yeah, I do. I put in chat. Okay, I have a wild garden with hummingbirds I see and butterflies. What plants are native to San Francisco?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kat.
and I actually just put that in the chat for Anna as well. So there is the native plant finder at I believe it's the National Wildlife Federation. And here I'll put the link again in the chat. There's also, I believe, the Lady Bird Johnson Wildlife native plant website, but I'll put that in there too. And then we also have a mapper of native plant nurseries in the US. So if you want to look at that on our website, you can see the nurseries around you that sell native plants. Unfortunately, the larger department stores in the US, like Home Depot and Lowe's, they just don't sell native plants. They sell the non-native plants. And I could go into a long thing about why in the United States we sell exotic plants and not the native plants at our department stores. But there are local native plant nurseries all over the country that sell only native plants. And so if you can find those nurseries and go there and ask them, they will tell you exactly what you need for your property. And I'll post our actual mapper link too in there.
Thanks so much, Kat. Great question, Joyce. Lori?
Excuse me, if I could mention, each state may have an environmental conservation agency or something with a similar name. That is also a good resource to find out about native plants to your state.
Thanks so much, Rosa. Absolutely. And I see Lourdes, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks a lot. I would like to ask, I live in Osoyoos, British Columbia in the Okanagan Valley. It's a desert. And I would like to ask you, what are the combinations of plants that goes together in order to attract insects, butterflies, hummingbirds? Is there a book that give us a guideline?
I'm sorry, could you say where you're located again?
I'm looking for a flowering plants that attracts insects, butterflies, and something that combine together, because we live in the desert. It's close to the US border, Okanagan Valley. And so it's very difficult to, because it's a dry, it's actually dry, and it's a sand. It's a combination of sand and land. And there are some species that do not grow into this area.
Yeah, so it is tough in the desert, especially when you also want to find plants that are in desert ecosystems naturally have more water saving capabilities.
Yes.
So finding those native plants. So I think if you're close to the US border, we do have some of the native plant nurseries, I believe, that are just outside, but there's also, maybe we can, if you want to email me, I can help you with more specifics.
I will.
We have a horticulturist that volunteers with us, and she does give advice, and really it's about what would be there naturally, and then also learning what's also having trouble in your area, what species are threatened or having issues, and what host plants they need to survive. One really interesting thing that we have in my area near Baltimore, Maryland, in Harford County, our little town of Bel Air has decided that they want to be proactive about this, and they have decided there's the Bel Air five species of native plants that will help certain insects that need help around here, and they're promoting those 5 plants specifically so that the whole little area can be connected with these plants. So efforts like that are really, really useful. So there might be some information about what the scientists in your area are seeing the habitat for specific species that are currently experiencing more issues than other species.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. All of you has done a great job. Thank you.
This is wonderful. And we had one more question come in through the chat that maybe I'll pass over to you, Wesley, around, starting youth group. A youth group is starting at a parish, and the person who asked is wondering what she might do with the youth group that is starting. Do you have some good ideas around that?
Well, I can give it a shot at least. I think I would suggest really what Kat has been saying for the whole presentation. I think there is something really tangible and exciting about getting your hands dirty And, I know when I was younger, like I was looking for opportunities like that, to be involved in the land in some way. And so I think depending on what kind of property like your parish is on, like consider like a native garden as a communal project. And I think the more that you involve people in the work, the more that they will have ownership of it. I think oftentimes in faith-based, in parish work, in faith-based work, it's sort of like, oh, the one person who's really efficient is the one that does all the work. And there isn't as intentional an effort to try to involve as many people in the design and the implementation, and most importantly, in taking care of it. Like we can't just start gardens and restoration projects. We do need to kind of continue to have a relationship in the long run. Yeah, so I would, like involve the young people as much as possible, and use them as experts in their own right, rather than just, hands to do work.
I love that, Wesley. What a phenomenal petition. What a phenomenal way to say, like, yeah, we don't do this work alone. And so I'm recognizing we are 15 minutes over the hour, and just so grateful to Wesley and Kat for staying on, and grateful to all of you for staying on with questions as well. And perhaps we will close at this moment, but just such deep gratitude, and to know that we may be closing this webinar, but we are not closing our collaboration and working together on this very important issue as we continue to move forward. So following this webinar, we will be sending out the recording along with the whole host of links that have been dropped into the chat, as well as a biodiversity toolkit that Laudato Si Movement has been pulling together to help you continue to dive deeper into what is native in your area, continue to learn a little bit more, and think about how to keep moving. That has been developed in conjunction with our advocacy working group. And so just also to name that we have an advocacy working group that works on issues such as this. And so if you would like to join that, or you're interested in joining that, please send me an email and I'll get you linked in and connected. So thank you again. Enjoy your walk or your dance or whatever you do today to move your body and move through all this. Joyce, I love it. And we look forward to continuing to connect on this as we move forward. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.
You.